Welcome to the China Puzzle News Wrap, where we get you up to speed on the latest headlines in China and everything you need to know. Let's dive straight in. Looking to some key headlines in China, the 11th of November is Singles Day and marks the world's largest online shopping event. President Xi stressed the importance of openness to trade in his remarks at the International Import Expo in Shanghai. China wrapped up its fifth plenum meeting, which provided insight into its 5-year plan. And China successfully launched a test of 6G technology into space. Looking now to foreign policy, the UK government has launched a digital trade campaign recognising the importance of China as a trading partner. Australia-China relations have worsened with rumours about trade bans on key Australian exports. And finally, the story that everybody's talking about, the results of the US election. Now, let's look at the top story on everyone's minds this week, the US election and President Biden coming up victorious in an election that was rather drawn out. I've got Nick here so we can chat about what this all means for China and for the rest of the world. Nick, what's your take on what we've seen in the past few days?
The interesting thing about the election from within the US and how it impacts China is that there actually was a bipartisanship on China's relationships. Now, that is pretty much is that there was still an agreed kind of format behind the Democrats and the Republicans that there should be kind of containment of China. So I don't think that changes anything. What was kind of interesting from if you looked at Global Times and kind of like other kind of pieces from the Chinese media, they definitely do respect Biden more. They believe he's more mature, less unpredictable. And I think these are all traits that, Biden does show. So I think within that, I think they understand that the key issues haven't changed, but there's more predictable outcomes going forth. So I think that's something they are interested in engaging with again. So there is an opportunity, a kind of like a fire break here to kind of reassess, how they go forward with like the trading issues, the security issues that they're currently facing.
I agree. I think you're absolutely right. I think, there is a bipartisan approach in terms of the US is going to continue to be tough on China. And I think that bids well with the US domestic votership, and President Biden or President-elect is very conscious of that. I do think he'll have a very different approach to Trump, and that goes without saying. I think he's got a unique position in that when he was vice president, he had already been in those key foreign policy circles and already built a relationship with President Xi, who was at the time also vice president. So they had that in common. They had that opportunity to get to know one another. So I think the way he goes about putting forth the US's views, it will be a lot of the same lines, but it will be communicated very differently. And I think he'll have a more diplomatic approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you looked in the kind of like Obama kind of foreign policy themes of the time, there was definitely a push to engagement in Asia. So it could be seeing a strengthening of kind of relationships with Vietnam, Philippines, and Thailand as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Joe Biden throughout his career has had a real interest in foreign policy. So I think he will be more outward looking than Trump has been. And that could mean that sort of strengthening of relations in the Asia Pacific region to sort of, see China as the security challenger that it is, but also to work a bit more constructively at building cooperation in the region. I know that tech was a big focus of China's recent fifth plenum, which is the blueprint for its 14th 5-year economic plan, looking out to what it projects it's going to focus on for its economic and social policies from 2021 to 2025.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting if with the document, it is very much focused on kind of like innovation as being a driver of them achieving domestic goals. So that's quite an important thing. The other kind of key thing that was in their domestic goals is the ongoing rural and urban divide. I mean, it's something that I think they stay awake at night worrying about, because there is so many kind of, there's the countless concerns of the vast gap that's appearing. And this has all kind of been leading to 100 years of Chinese socialism. And they've always had this set goal that they wanted a modern socialist economy for China. This is a very important thing because, that's the year of Mao's victory. It's such a crucial kind of imprint of give me 100 years and I'll turn our country around. And, to a large extent, you're seeing that in the urban areas. It's incredible. And, with the kind of with President Xi moving away from the 10-year terms, I think he's set himself a goal, right? What's that goal?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because traditionally it's always a 5-year plan, and it's one of the world's only large economies that actually sets a sort of long-term plan publicly like this. The plan itself hasn't been released. This is just a blueprint for what will be released early next year. But they have signaled that they'll include some goals for 15 years out. So looking at 2035 and bringing forward that goal that you've mentioned about modernizing the economy. So I think there's some, strong ambition, as you say, for President Xi to leave a legacy. And perhaps 2035 is, as you say, a point in which he imagines his tenure will still be strong, but perhaps coming to an end, and wanting to kind of leave on a high note to turn the country around and diminish that divide between the cities and the rural areas, as you say. When you're talking about the Chinese economy and their plans on how to reform and modernize, in some of President Xi's recent comments publicly, he's very much impressed the importance of openness to trade and rejected protectionism. I think that was seen in the 5th plenum meeting, as well as in his remarks to the International Import Expo in Shanghai. And this is an interesting one because at the same time, we're seeing that there are rumors of a potential trade ban on Australian exports to China, which would go against those principles of openness. So, is this a signaling from President Xi that those are just rumors and that's not the approach they're taking? Is it about signaling to the next US president that we hope this trade war will end and we want to focus more on international cooperation? I think it's very kind of something that people should be watching in President Xi's remarks about where China's heading.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite an amazing figure for people who aren't aware that they're looking at about, I think it's 14 products. It's including Australian wheat, copper, lobsters, and, there's actually a large trade. So it's a very heavily focused on agricultural exports for Australia. It's something in the realms of 6 billion Australian dollars. And to kind of put that in perspective, that's almost like 20% of UK Australia trade. That's what they're considering banning. It's an outrageous number, and we've been seeing that some West Australian lobster farmers had sent about $2 million worth of fish of lobsters to Shanghai, and the classic custom game of no, these need to get new health checks happened over 3 weeks until the lobsters died. So, these are these kind of things, and this is where the rumors are coming from. And so a lot of Chinese businesses are no longer getting their business from Australia because they're hearing this is happening. I think this is interesting because if you look at the timing of this is based on the US elections. And I kind of think that Australia is always kind of like the canary in relations to that. So it may have been an early warning to Trump if he'd been re-elected. So it could be interesting to see if some of the stuff doesn't eventuate because there's that fire break with Biden. But realistically, I do expect these things to happen because I don't think Australia is going to change tack in how they engage with China anytime soon. So I think it would be good to understand how we need to talk about trade with China in the UK. And that kind of brings us to the next piece we were going to talk about, which is UK launching a digital trade campaign for how to conduct business in China.
Yeah, it's interesting timing, isn't it? Because as you say, we're going through some challenging times in Australia in relation to trade with China. And when we look at what's going on there and look at the UK, it's definitely a cause for, reflecting and looking at lessons. And it does seem that the UK government is very much focusing on China more than ever. And it's released a new digital campaign and strategy that sends a message to businesses in the UK about trading with China, about investing in China. And the message is one of opportunity, but also one of cautioning about the complexities of doing business in China.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Looking at the document and website, it was kind of like, it's obviously, it's very whiz bang, it's excellent, it just looks exciting. And then you start churning through the detail of it and it gets very cautious very quickly. It's actually quite a surprising document. There's a lot of concern. And, these trade documents are not about concern normally. They're just about the bountiful, endless opportunities of success and all of that. But this one was very clear about some significant case studies with reputation, loss, IP rights. So it was an interesting document to look at and probably accurate and reflective of the current trade situation that we're faced with China at the moment. So, there's some positives there. It's good that, there is money to be made and there is economic interaction, but there's so much caution there now that we have to really be open about and engage with, because there's just example after example of companies being burnt in China, unfortunately.
It's an interesting one that we'll have to keep watching it evolve. And it's actually quite reflective of, the people that we've been speaking to as part of the China puzzle, to different academics, business people and politicians. And that similar message has come through in a lot of people that we've spoken with, is that there is so much opportunity, there is so much positivity that could come out of strengthening relations with China. But there's definitely a caveat around how to approach that, and being very keenly aware of a different system or different political system, different way of doing business. So that's something we'll continue to look at through this series and try and unpack and get a range of views on, because it's something that we're all continuously learning from. And what's happening around the world, whether it's to do with China or Australia, these other relationships, it does all intertwine into that conversation. So this is a way we can keep abreast of what's going on and hopefully inform the dialogue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. I mean, yeah, because I think that's the one interesting thing here is different business practices. It's just so fundamentally, like, people talk about it and they just don't understand it. Like, there's maybe a small concept of understanding face if you're a businessman and you've been to China once, but it's just not enough. It's the fundamentals of society. So I think that's a very good point, and we should definitely go into that.
Yeah. Thanks for chatting with me. I think we've hit on the key stories for the past couple of weeks, and look forward to chatting to you next time.